Alright, quick hello from me. This is an original story from Talesphere, and honestly, I didn't see this one unfolding the way it did. Alright, let's get into it.
On my 35th birthday, my mother-in-law looked at my 8-year-old daughter and announced, "Don't be like Mommy. She's a liar." Then I got slapped across the face in front of 27 guests. I stood up, laughing. When they found out why, their faces drained of color. I know how that sounds. Like a headline that crawled out of the internet on its hands and knees. Like I'm about to sell you a weight loss tea and a manifestation journal. But I'm telling you this because the slap wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the sentence that came before it. Because the slap hit my face. That sentence aimed for my daughter's brain. And once a kid learns to doubt her mother, you don't just move on. You either fix it, fast, or you spend years paying interest on someone else's cruelty. My name is Claire Harrington. Yes, that's my legal name. No, it's not the name I was born with. That's what happens when you marry into a family that treats names like branding. I'm an attorney. I'm 35. And I have an 8-year-old daughter named Sophie who is so polite she says, "Excuse me," to furniture. She's also the reason I didn't walk away quietly. Because when you have a child, you don't get to choose the easy version of courage. You get the necessary one. That morning, my birthday morning, our apartment was silent in the way expensive spaces are silent. Thick carpets, good windows. The kind of calm that makes you feel like you're being watched even when you're not. Sophie sat at the kitchen island in her pajamas, shoulders tucked in, like she was trying to make herself smaller than her own body. I poured pancake batter. She didn't look at me. Not in the usual sleepy kid way, in the careful way. The what mood is mom in and what answer is safe way. That doesn't come from nowhere. That comes from training. "Mom?" Sophie said finally, tracing a slow circle on the marble with her finger. "Yeah, baby." Do I have to go tonight?" She didn't mean the restaurant. She meant Margaret, my mother-in-law. The woman who could say sweetheart like it was a warning. I kept my voice light. "It's my birthday dinner. We'll be there for a little while. Then we'll go home." Sophie nodded like she understood the words, but not the promise. Then she said the thing that made my stomach drop. "Grandma said you lie." Just like that. No drama. No tears. Just a flat sentence, like she was repeating a homework fact. I stopped moving. Not because I didn't know what to say, because I didn't want my face to teach Sophie that truth causes explosions. I turned off the burner, wiped my hands, and crouched so we were eye level. "Did Grandma say that?" I asked gently. Sophie nodded. "What exactly did she say?" Sophie's lips pressed together. She hesitated, like answering wrong could get her in trouble. Then she whispered. She said, "Don't be like Mommy. Mommy makes things up." "Did Grandpa say anything?" Sophie swallowed. He said, "Your mother tells stories." Stories. That's what they called my reality when it didn't match their narrative. It's such a clever word, isn't it? It sounds harmless. Like bedtime. Like imagination. Like you're not actively teaching a child that her mother can't be trusted. I took Sophie's hands. Her fingers were cold. "Soph, look at me." She looked up slowly, and I hated how prepared she looked for consequences. "I'm not perfect," I said. "Sometimes I get things wrong. Sometimes I forget things. But I don't lie to you. Ever." Her shoulders lowered a fraction, like she wanted to lean into that truth, but wasn't sure she was allowed. Then she whispered, "Grandma said if I believe you, I'm being disloyal." That word hit me harder than any slap. Disloyal. They weren't just insulting me, they were recruiting my child. Here's what you should understand about the Harringtons. They don't fight like normal families fight. They don't yell and slam doors and regret it later. They manage. They don't threaten. They imply. They don't punish you loudly. They punish you quietly, elegantly, in ways that make you look crazy if you complain. A raised eyebrow, a concerned text, a perfectly timed comment in front of the right person. They'll ruin your life with a smile and then send you flowers to prove they're not that kind of people. Margaret Harrington didn't need to scream to be terrifying. She did it with tone. The first time I met her, she looked me up and down like she was pricing me. Then she said, "Oh, Claire, you're charming." Charming is what rich people say when they don't mean impressive. Charming is what you call a thing you'd never take seriously. When I married Alex, Margaret made sure I understood the rules, not directly. She never said, "I'm in charge." She said things like, "We're a close family. Alexander needs stability. We value discretion." And then she'd smile like she'd just offered me tea instead of a warning. Alex would squeeze my hand under the table like he was reassuring me, and I'd squeeze back thinking, he's on my side. He chose me. I didn't know yet that Alex had been conditioned to choose his mother the way people choose breathing, not because he wanted to, because he didn't know he had another option. Alex wasn't cruel in a loud way. He didn't call me names. He didn't throw things. He did something more dangerous. He stayed neutral. He'd hear Margaret say something sharp to Sophie, something like, "We don't whine in this family," when my daughter's eyes were full of tears, and he'd just keep eating. He'd watch Sophie flinch at Margaret's touch and say nothing. And if I tried to step in, he'd murmur, "Claire, don't start." Don't start. Translation: don't make my mother uncomfortable. The first time I realized Margaret was working on Sophie, it wasn't dramatic. It was small. We were at Margaret's house for brunch, one of those properties where everything smells like lemon and money. Sophie dropped a fork. The fork hit the floor with a tiny clink. Sophie froze like she'd dropped a grenade. Margaret didn't even look down. She looked at Sophie and said softly, "Clumsy. Not oops. Not it's okay. Clumsy. Like it was a personality defect." Sophie's face went red. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Margaret sipped her coffee. "Don't apologize. Fix yourself." And then she glanced at me with a smile. "Children model what they see," she said, meaning, this is your fault. After that, little things started showing up like cracks in glass. Sophie stopped running into my arms when I picked her up from school. She walked, carefully, like she was trying not to appear too excited. She started asking permission before laughing. At bedtime, she'd tell me stories about Grandma's rules. Grandma says good girls don't ask questions. Grandma says crying is manipulative. Grandma says if I say something Mommy said, I have to check if it's true first. Check if it's true first. She was 8. They were making her fact-check her own mother like I was a rumor. One night, Sophie whispered, "Grandma says you get confused." I held her close. "Did Grandma say that?" Sophie nodded. "What did she mean?" Sophie's voice was tiny. "She said, sometimes you imagine things. Like, you think something happened, but it didn't." And there it was. Not just alienation. Gaslighting. Installed in a child. And if you've never seen that up close, let me tell you, it's chilling. Because kids believe adults. Kids believe confidence. Kids believe the person who speaks like the rules are already written. Margaret spoke like she had a pen in her hand and the authority to rewrite reality. I tried, at first, to handle it like a normal person. I talked to Alex. I said, "Your mother is undermining me with our child." Alex sighed like I'd complained about the weather. "Claire," he said, "she's old school. She's not undermining you. She's trying to help Sophie." Help. That was always the word. Margaret didn't control. She helped. Margaret didn't manipulate. She guided. Margaret didn't hurt. She corrected. And if you dared to call it what it was, you were emotional. You were unstable. You were making things up. Then came Dr. Paul Kessler. Kessler entered our lives like a solution. Margaret framed him as a gift. He's exceptional, she told Alex. He's discreet. He understands families like ours. Families like ours. As if wealth was a mental illness with a support group. Kessler wasn't warm. He didn't ask, "How are you feeling?" He asked, "Are you compliant?" Okay, not in those words. He dressed it up. He called it alignment. He called it family coherence. He called it reducing friction. But what he really did was teach Alex to interpret any disagreement from me as a threat. If I set a boundary, I was provoking instability. If I defended Sophie, I was creating conflict. If I asked why Margaret was allowed to say things to our daughter that would get a teacher fired, I was undermining authority. Authority. That was Margaret again. Always Margaret. The sessions were always in Margaret's home office, always with Margaret present, always with Alex sitting closest to her. Kessler would look at me like I was a case file and say things like, "Claire, tell us why you struggle with control." I'd blink and say, "Excuse me?" He'd smile slightly. "You prefer your version of reality." My version. As if there were two equal sides. As if Margaret's lies were simply her perspective. Kessler didn't ask Sophie how she felt. He asked Sophie who she felt safe with, and Margaret would watch, eyes bright, waiting for the right answer. The first time Sophie answered, "Mommy," Margaret's smile didn't move, but her hand tightened around her teacup. Then Margaret said gently, "Sophie, sweetheart, remember, Mommy gets overwhelmed." And Sophie's brow furrowed. Then Sophie said, "I feel safe with Grandma too." Margaret's eyes softened like she'd just won something, and I realized this wasn't therapy. This was a custody rehearsal. That's when I stopped trying to win inside their system, because you cannot win a game where the other side owns the referee. So I started doing what lawyers do when they don't have the luxury of being naive. I documented. I didn't scream. I didn't plead. I didn't beg Alex to see it. I built a file. There's a shelf in my closet behind handbags I never liked. If you pull the third bag and press the back panel, the shelf lifts. Inside is a small fireproof safe. Inside the safe were thumb drives, printed records, and a folder labeled Harrington C. Kessler, custody, not revenge, not destroy them. Just custody, because that was the battlefield Margaret was walking us toward, whether I wanted it or not. I saved every text Margaret sent that looked innocent but wasn't. Just checking in, Sophie seemed unusually clingy after being with you. I'm worried about Sophie's exposure to emotional volatility. Have you considered that your career may be impacting your ability to parent consistently? Consistently. That's another rich people word. It means you don't get to have a life unless it fits our aesthetic. I saved every email from Kessler. Invoices with strange phrasing. Notes that sounded like someone writing a narrative, not documenting health. I saved calendar invites titled Family Session that were really training sessions for Alex. I saved the one text from Alex that broke my heart. Mom says it would be better if Sophie spends more time at her place. She needs structure. Structure. Sophie needed safety, and if Alex couldn't tell the difference, that wasn't just a marriage problem. That was a parenting emergency. I hired Ryan quietly. Ryan wasn't dramatic. He didn't wear a trench coat. He didn't call himself an investigator like it was a movie title. He wore plain clothes and listened more than he spoke. He was also the first person who said something that made me feel sane again. After I told him everything, Margaret, Kessler, Sophie's new fear, Ryan nodded slowly and said, This is classic alienation. And the money stuff? That's just the engine. The control is the point. The control is the point. Exactly. Ryan did what I couldn't do alone. He found patterns. He followed the paper. He connected names and LLCS and transfers. He found the quiet machinery behind the Harrington image. Because the Harringtons weren't just wealthy. They were connected. Donors. Board members. People whose phones got answered. People who believed consequences were for other families. And when people like that commit crimes, they don't do it like amateurs. They do it with spreadsheets. I'm not going to pretend I understood everything at first. I understood family law. I understood courtroom strategy. But the money was a maze. Ryan laid it out for me one night at my kitchen table while Sophie slept down the hall. He slid a folder across the marble. "Here," he said. "Look at this. Transfers, dates, amounts." He tapped one line. "This isn't normal business. This is routing." I stared. "Where is it going?" Ryan exhaled. "Places people go when they don't want anyone to see where the money went." And suddenly, Margaret's polished life looked less like legacy and more like a crime scene with good lighting. The scariest part wasn't the money. It was realizing Margaret wasn't just trying to humiliate me. She was trying to erase me. She was building a story where Claire Harrington was unstable, dishonest, emotionally volatile, and therefore not a reliable parent. If she could get that story into the right hands, she could take Sophie away without ever raising her voice. And if you think that sounds dramatic, you've never watched a wealthy family weaponize concern. Because in a family like the Harringtons, concern is a knife you're expected to thank them for. That's when I did the other thing Margaret never expected. I walked the evidence outside of her world, quietly, to people who didn't care about Harrington parties, people who cared about Harrington paper trails. I didn't walk into an office screaming, "My mother-in-law is evil." I walked in with a binder. I walked in with timelines. I walked in with documented patterns. And when you put facts in front of the right people, they don't roll their eyes. They take notes. By the time my birthday dinner arrived, there were already conversations happening in offices downtown. Sealed doors, neutral voices, words like wire transfers, shell entities, money laundering, obstruction, and witness tampering. There was talk of the Southern District of New York. There was talk of warrants. There was talk of timing. And Margaret, who controlled everything, had no idea she was already late. So when Alex told me, "Dinner will be intimate," I smiled. In Harrington language, intimate means curated. It means every person was chosen for a reason. It means every seat has a purpose. It means the room itself is a weapon. I spent that day the way you spend a day when you know a storm is coming. I worked. I answered emails. I picked Sophie up from school. I listened to her chatter about a class project like my heart wasn't tight as a fist. At one point she asked, "Do you think Grandma will be nice tonight?" I said, "I think Grandma will be herself." Sophie nodded like she understood exactly what that meant. That's not something an 8-year-old should have to understand. When we got home, Sophie got dressed slowly. She chose socks twice, changed them, then changed them again. Small anxiety disguised as choices. Alex came in from the bedroom wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. He didn't look at me when he adjusted his cufflinks. He looked at his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen like he was waiting for permission to breathe. I watched him and felt a strange grief, because I remembered the man he used to be, the man who laughed easily, the man who held Sophie like she was fragile and precious, not like she was a responsibility to be managed. Now he moved like a puppet who didn't know he had strings. On the ride over, Sophie sat between us in the back seat. Alex stared out the window, jaw tense. I watched the city blur past and tried to keep my breathing slow. Not because I was afraid of Margaret, Because I was afraid of what Sophie would see. Kids don't forget scenes like this. Kids store them in their bodies, and I was done letting my daughter's nervous system become collateral damage in Margaret's war. We arrived at a private dining room at Hudson Yards, high above Manhattan, where the windows made the city look like a toy set built for rich people. The staff smiled too brightly. The flowers were arranged too perfectly. The air smelled like citrus and quiet judgment. Sophie's hand was in mine, and her fingers were cold. Margaret greeted us at the entrance like she was accepting an award. "Claire," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. "You look lovely." Translation: "You look acceptable." Then she crouched in front of Sophie and adjusted her dress. Not gently, possessively. "My beautiful girl," Margaret said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Say hello, properly." Sophie's mouth opened. No sound came out. Margaret's smile didn't move, but her fingers tightened on Sophie's shoulder. Sophie whispered, "Hi." Margaret patted her cheek. "Good." And then, without looking at me, she added, "See? She listens." I scanned the room the way lawyers scan juries. Faces, body language, allies, risks. 27 guests. I counted. Margaret liked numbers that felt intentional, like nothing in her life was accidental. 27 meant controlled, not random. It meant she'd decided exactly how many witnesses she wanted. There was a state senator, Whitaker, laughing too hard at jokes that weren't funny, the kind of man everyone still called senator anyway. A judge, Caldwell, drinking expensive wine like ethics rules were an optional accessory. A few Harrington executives with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. A couple of family friends whose friendship looked suspiciously like shared secrets. And then, seated with a clear view of our table, like the evening had been built around his line of sight, Dr. Paul Kessler. Kessler lifted his glass at me, not as a greeting, as a challenge. Dinner began. Waiters moved like shadows. Plates arrived like art. People talked about investments and legacy and family values in the tone you use when you're trying to convince yourself you're a good person. Sophie picked at her food like she was afraid the plate might accuse her of something. Alex didn't touch mine or Sophie's plate. He drank water and watched Margaret. I knew that look. It was the look of a man waiting to be told what he was allowed to do next. At one point, Margaret leaned across the table and said to Sophie, "Sweetheart, tell Grandma what Mommy promised you." Sophie blinked. I don't..." Margaret smiled. "Come on, you remember. Mommy said she'd take you somewhere, didn't she?" Sophie glanced at me, confused. I realized what Margaret was doing. She was planting a trap. If Sophie guessed wrong, Margaret could say, "See? Mommy confuses her." If Sophie guessed right, Margaret could say, "See? Mommy makes promises she can't keep." Either way, the conclusion was the same. Mommy is unreliable. Grandma is stable. I cut in calmly. "Sophie and I are going to the museum on Saturday." Margaret's smile held. "Oh," she said, as if she'd won something. "Saturday. How sweet." Then she turned to the guests. "Claire is very ambitious," Margaret said. "Sometimes ambition makes it hard to focus on what matters." She placed a hand over her heart like she was worried. The guests murmured politely. I thought, this is not a birthday dinner. This is a deposition with appetizers. Halfway through the meal, Margaret stood and tapped her glass. The room quieted instantly because rich people are trained to obey wealth the way dogs obey whistles. "My dear friends," she began, "thank you for celebrating Claire tonight." She looked at me. 35, she said, like it was a diagnosis. Polite laughter. Then Margaret's eyes slid to Sophie. "And this," she said warmly. is our little Sophie, 8 years old. The future. Sophie stiffened. Margaret extended her hand, palm up, like she was summoning a pet. Sophie, she said. Come here, sweetheart. Sophie looked at me. I nodded. Small. Encouraging. I'm here. I've got you. Sophie walked to Margaret, stopping just close enough to be in her reach. Margaret placed a hand on Sophie's back. Not supportive. Controlling. And then Margaret smiled at the room and said, Now, Sophie, you remember what we talked about. Tell everyone what Grandma told you. Sophie's face went pale. Grandma said, she started, voice shaking. Margaret squeezed her back, hard. Sophie flinched. Go on, Margaret said softly. Sophie's eyes flicked to me again. And Margaret delivered the line herself for maximum damage. She turned Sophie slightly toward me like a human prop and said, Don't be like Mommy. A few guests chuckled, uncertain. Margaret's smile widened. She's a liar. The room went still. Not shocked still. Interested still. Like they'd been waiting for the show to start. I felt heat crawl up my neck. My hands went numb. Sophie stood there frozen, like the floor was suddenly unsafe. I started to rise. Margaret! Margaret held up one manicured finger without looking at me, and everyone accepted it. Everyone let her silence me. Because when people like Margaret speak, people like this room listen. Alex's chair scraped. He stood. I knew that sound. I'd heard it late at night after Kessler sessions. I'd heard it after Margaret talks with him. It was the sound of Alex turning into the person Margaret needed him to be. He didn't look at Sophie. He didn't look at me like a husband. He looked at me like a problem. Claire, he said, loud enough for the room. Why don't you tell everyone the truth for once? My breath caught. He continued, voice tight, rehearsed. You've been lying. About money. About where you go. About what you tell Sophie. I stared at him. His eyes were glassy. Not drunk. Conditioned. Alex, I said quietly. Stop. Margaret's gaze never left me. Kessler leaned back, watching like this was his favorite episode. Alex's jaw clenched. And then he did exactly what Margaret wanted. He stepped forward, and he slapped me. It wasn't a dramatic movie slap. It was worse. A real one. The kind that makes your ears ring, and your skin burn, and your brain take a second to catch up. For a heartbeat, the room stayed perfectly silent. Then I heard Sophie gasp. A small sound. The sound of a child realizing adults can be dangerous. That sound, more than the sting on my face, almost broke me. Almost. I touched my cheek, looked at my fingers. No blood. Just heat. Just proof. 27 witnesses. 27 sets of eyes. 27 people who could no longer pretend they didn't know. And that's when I did the one thing Margaret didn't plan for. I laughed. Not hysterical. Not manic. Just amused. Like someone had finally handed me the last missing page of a file I'd been building for years. Margaret blinked. Alex froze, like he'd woken up mid-dream. Someone whispered, "What the?" I stood, slowly, calmly. I smoothed my dress like I was preparing for closing arguments, and I said, clear as a bell, "Thank you." Margaret's smile twitched. "For what?" she asked. I looked around the room. "At everyone," I said. "For showing up." Silence. I smiled. "You didn't just come to my birthday dinner," I said. "You came to testify." Alex swallowed. "Claire, sit down." I turned to him. "Oh, Alex," I said softly. "I'm done sitting." Then I looked at Sophie, still standing by Margaret, still frozen. And I did something that didn't look dramatic, but mattered more than anything else I did that night. I held out my hand. "Soph," I said gently, "come to Mommy." Margaret's fingers tightened again. Sophie hesitated. I kept my hand out. No pressure, no panic, just an open door. Sophie's eyes filled, and then she moved. She stepped away from Margaret like she was stepping away from a hot stove she'd been told was normal. She walked to me. I took her hand, and I felt her whole body shake. Margaret's face hardened. "Claire, you are not going to make a scene." I leaned in, voice low enough that only she could hear. "I'm not making a scene," I whispered. "I'm ending one." Then, louder, for the room. "Ryan." From the side of the room, Ryan, my friend, my investigator, my quiet insurance policy, stood and nodded once. He approached like he belonged there, because he did. I crouched to Sophie. "Sweetheart," I said, "you're going to go with Ryan to Aunt Erin's, your dad's sister. Okay?" Sophie clutched my hand like a lifeline. "Are you coming?" she whispered. "In a minute," I promised. "I'm right behind you." Sophie looked at my cheek, looked at Alex. Then she nodded. Ryan guided her toward the door. Margaret took a step forward. I took a step too. Not aggressive, just positioned. Margaret stopped, because it's one thing to bully a woman alone. It's another thing to block her in front of 27 witnesses after your son just assaulted her. Even Margaret understood optics. When the door closed behind Sophie, I turned back to the table, and I let the lawyer part of me step forward, the part Margaret had spent years trying to shame into silence, the part that didn't cry. It documented. "Margaret," I said, "you were right." She lifted her chin. "Of course I was." I nodded. "I have been lying," I said. A ripple went through the guests. Margaret's eyes gleamed. Alex exhaled, like relief. Then I smiled again. "I've been lying," I continued, "about how much I knew." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small remote. The projector behind the room's art wall flickered. A few guests shifted, uncomfortable. A waiter glanced at Margaret like he wanted permission to exist. I didn't give him a chance to wait. I clicked. A slide appeared. Harrington Group. Flow of funds boxes. Arrows. LLCs with names so bland they sounded like fake people. Transfers with dates. Amounts with too many zeros. A neat little diagram of greed. Someone choked on their wine. Senator Whitaker's laughter died in his throat. Judge Caldwell's face turned the color of paper. Margaret stared. Still. Quiet. Like she didn't believe reality had the audacity. "You can't," Margaret started. "Oh, I can," I said, cheerful. "And the best part? I don't have to convince you." I clicked again. A second slide. Communications, instructions, text message screenshots, email headers, meeting notes with Margaret's friendly tone and very unfriendly intent. Then a third. Dr. Paul Kessler. Billing. Notes. Kessler sat up sharply. "That is confidential," he snapped. I tilted my head. "Doctor," I said, "you bill like a consultant and write like a strategist. Don't insult the room by pretending this is therapy." A few guests shifted, because I'd just said the quiet part out loud. Kessler's jaw clenched. "You obtained those illegally." I smiled. "You're welcome to argue that in court." Then I looked at the room. "Also," I added, "for anyone wondering, I'm an attorney. I didn't build this case with vibes." Margaret's nostrils flared. "Claire," she said coldly, "you're embarrassing yourself." I clicked again. A fourth slide. custody strategy, narrative, and under it, audio. Margaret's voice filled the room, calm and cruel. If Sophie starts repeating what Claire says, correct it immediately. Tell her mommy makes things up. We need her to doubt Claire's memory. If Sophie believes Claire lies, family court becomes easier. You could feel every guest's spine stiffen. That wasn't old-school parenting. That was intent. That was a plan. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another guest muttered, "Is that real?" Kessler's face went tight. Margaret didn't move, but her eyes did. They flicked once, just once, to Senator Whitaker. Like, "Fix this." Whitaker stared at the screen, like, "Absolutely not." Judge Caldwell's glass paused halfway to his mouth. Because even people who live on the edge of ethics tend to hate being caught on camera near the cliff. I clicked again. Another audio clip. Margaret again. "We'll say Claire is unstable. We'll say she's alienating Sophie from Alexander. We'll say she's emotionally volatile." A pause. Then Kessler's voice, smooth as a knife. "If Alexander loses control, it helps. A public incident would support the narrative." The room didn't just go quiet. It went thin, like the oxygen had been pulled out. I touched my cheek again, smiled at Alex. "Oh, look," I said lightly. "We got our public incident." Alex's face drained. Not guilt. Not yet. Fear, because fear is what happens when someone realizes they've been used. Margaret tried to laugh. A little sound. Dry. "You're recording family conversations?" she said, like I was the monster. I shrugged. "My attorney advised me," I said, and then added sweetly, "Oh, wait, that's me." A few guests flinched, because sarcasm feels inappropriate, until you realize it's the only thing holding you upright. Margaret's voice sharpened. "You can't threaten people in my home." "Margaret," I said, "this isn't your home. This is a private dining room with staff and security cameras." Then I smiled at the room. "And before anyone gets any creative ideas," I added, "copies of everything you're seeing tonight are already out of my hands." Margaret's face tightened. "Who did you send them to?" she demanded. I paused, just long enough for it to sting. Then I said clearly, "The U.S. Attorney's Office." A ripple. "And the FBI." Now the ripple became a wave. Because wealthy people don't panic over morality, they panic over jurisdiction. A guest stood abruptly. "This is insane. I'm leaving." "Of course you are," I said pleasantly. "Just remember, leaving doesn't erase what you witnessed." Another guest reached for his phone. I lifted a hand. "Go ahead. Call your lawyer." "I already did." Margaret's voice turned sharp. "Claire, stop this, right now." I looked at her. Really looked. And beneath the polish, beneath the posture, I saw it. Not anger. Terror. Because Margaret didn't fear shame. She feared losing control. Kessler pushed his chair back. "You're destroying a family." I tilted my head. "No, doctor. I'm documenting what you helped build." He snapped. "This is a violation of privacy." I smiled. I love when people say privacy when they mean impunity. Then I clicked again. A final slide. Witness list. 27 present names. Not all of them, obviously, just enough for the message to land. I looked around the room. "Congratulations," I said. "You're all part of the record now." And that's when the door opened. Not softly, not politely. It swung with purpose. A man in a dark jacket stepped in, voice calm as a weather report. "NYPD, and federal agents with a warrant." Behind him, more people entered. Badges. Paperwork. Quiet authority. Rich rooms are used to attention. They are not used to this kind of attention. The man in front, Captain Donnelly, walked straight toward Margaret. "Margaret Harrington," he said. "We have warrants." Margaret lifted her chin like she could outstare the law. "This is harassment," she said. Donnelly didn't blink. "Ma'am, please stand." Kessler half stood, then thought better of it. An agent stepped toward him. "Dr. Kessler," the agent said, "we need you to come with us." Kessler's face twisted. "On what grounds?" The agent looked down at the paperwork. "Multiple," he said. "Start with obstruction." Kessler opened his mouth, closed it, sat down slowly like gravity had doubled. Senator Whitaker's hands were shaking. Judge Caldwell looked like he'd just remembered every ethics seminar he'd ever ignored. One executive started sweating through his collar. Another woman whispered, "I shouldn't have come." And I thought, yes, that's the point. Margaret turned toward Alex, eyes flashing. "Alexander!" she snapped. "Do something!" Alex looked at her, then at me, then at the agents. And for the first time all night, he looked like a man who wasn't sure who he belonged to. He swallowed. "Claire, what did you do?" I met his eyes. "I protected our daughter," I said. "That's what I did." His voice cracked. I didn't mean..." I held up a hand. "Alex," I said quietly, "you hit me in front of 27 witnesses." He flinched like I'd slapped him back with words. "I don't need you to explain it," I said. "I need you to understand it." Margaret began speaking rapidly, names, donors, connections, threats disguised as reminders. Donnelly listened like he was bored. Because people like Margaret always think power is portable, like it can be carried in a handbag. It can't. Not when you walk into a room where everyone is immune to your charm. Agents began collecting phones, laptops, watches that weren't just watches. Margaret's face tightened as she realized the room wasn't hers anymore. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Not joy. Relief. Because the cage door had finally made a sound. Later, hours later, I sat in Erin's guest room, holding a paper cup of tea I hadn't tasted. Erin, Alex's sister, stood by the doorway like a guard. Erin had always been polite in the way family members are polite when they're watching you for weakness, but tonight her eyes were soft. "Are you okay?" she asked. I touched my cheek. "It stings," I said. Erin's mouth tightened. "He hit you." "Yeah," I said. "He did." Erin swallowed. "Sophie?" I looked toward the bed. Sophie was asleep curled around a stuffed animal, cheeks tear-stained, breath steady. "She's here," I whispered. "She's safe." Erin nodded once, fierce. "Good." When Sophie woke in the middle of the night, she padded into the room and climbed into my lap without speaking. Her little arms locked around my waist. She didn't cry. She just held on like she was terrified I might evaporate. I kissed the top of her head. "You're safe," I murmured. After a long moment, Sophie whispered, "Grandma said you'd leave me." My chest tightened. "No," I said immediately. "Never." Sophie's voice was muffled against my shirt. "She said you leave when you're mad." I held her tighter. "Listen to me, Soph," I said. "If I ever leave a room, it's because I'm getting help, not because I'm leaving you." Sophie nodded, small, slow. Then she fell asleep against me like her body finally believed what her mind wanted to believe. The next morning, I didn't make a dramatic speech. I didn't post on social media. I didn't cry in the shower and call it healing. I did what I always do when something matters. I filed. Emergency order of protection. Documentation attached. Security camera footage attached. Audio attached. Witness list attached. 27 names. 27 people who couldn't pretend they didn't see. And when you're dealing with a family like the Harringtons, that's what breaks the spell. Not emotion. Evidence. Alex called once. His voice sounded like it came from a hallway. "Claire," he said. "Please. I don't know what's wrong with me." I believed him. That didn't excuse him. But it explained the haunted look I'd seen behind his eyes for years, like he'd been living someone else's life and couldn't find the exit. "Get help," I told him. "Real help. Not Kessler." "Can I see Sophie?" My throat tightened. "Not right now," I said. "Not until a court tells me it's safe." Silence. Then a small broken sound. "Okay." Then I ended the call. Because you can have compassion without offering yourself back as a sacrifice. A week later, Sophie asked me a question so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "Mom," she said, staring at her hands. "Am I bad?" My chest went tight. "No," I said instantly. "Why would you think that?" Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. "Grandma said, if I love you more than Dad, I'm disloyal." Disloyal again. Always that word. It's a leash disguised as morality. I swallowed the kind of rage that makes you dizzy. Then I did the only thing that really breaks a lie. I told the truth. Gently, repeatedly, until it became her reality again. "Love isn't disloyal," I said. "Love is safe." Sophie blinked. "Safe?" she repeated, like she was trying the word on. "Yes," I said. "Safe means you don't have to earn it. You don't have to perform. You don't have to choose sides." Sophie's shoulders loosened. Just a little. Like a plant turning toward light. People ask me if I regret laughing. No, because that laugh wasn't joy. It was recognition. It was the moment I realized they didn't slap me to break me. They slapped me because they thought I'd never fight back. They were wrong. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of being called a liar, because the truth was already on the screen. Thanks for watching. If this story hooked you, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? See you in the next video. At Christmas, my mother-in-law looked at my 6-year-old and said, "Children from mommy's cheating don't get to call me grandma," right after rejecting the gift my daughter had proudly made for her. Then my son stood up and said this. The whole room went dead silent. I swear the entire living room stopped breathing. Even the cheap little porcelain angel on my mother-in-law's mantel looked like it wanted to cover its ears. And me? I just stood there like someone had unplugged my brain. My mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a goldfish experiencing emotional trauma. My 6-year-old daughter Mia didn't understand the words, not fully, but she understood the rejection. Her face crumpled like tissue paper left out in the rain. And that's when the dizziness hit me so hard I had to grab the back of a chair. Not because I thought I might fall. No, I needed the chair so I wouldn't grab my mother-in-law Sharon instead. Everything had been so normal a minute earlier. Or at least Sharon-level normal, which meant aggressively festive and deeply fake. Her tree twinkled. The cinnamon candles were fighting for dominance with the burnt ham smell from the kitchen. Presents were stacked like we were filming an ad for seasonal overspending. And of course, the favoritism had been flowing like boxed wine at a PTA mixer. Bella went first. My sister-in-law Melanie's daughter Bella, who was about the same age as my own kids, and very obviously the golden child of my in-laws. She handed my mother-in-law, Sharon, a mug she'd decorated at school, a lumpy, glitter-encrusted thing that looked like it needed immediate hospitalization. Sharon shrieked like she'd been handed the Holy Grail and immediately swept Bella into her arms while my father-in-law, Lawrence, clapped like an animatronic grandfather programmed for enthusiasm. Then my older son, Noah, handed over his gift, a simple drawing of him and Sharon sledding. She squealed again, smoothing his hair and telling him he was such a talented little artist. They gave him a box bigger than he was, and when he ripped it open, it was a remote control car with flashing lights and wheels that could apparently drive on walls or ceilings or outer space. Then it was Mia's turn. They'd given her a little plastic doll with hair so sparse it looked like it had survived a bleach accident. Sharon smiled at her in that thin, strained way she only used when she wished she were smiling at literally anyone else. But Mia didn't notice. She was too excited, too proud. My sweet girl had spent days working on her picture. She held it with both hands, beaming, eyes bright, bouncing in place like a puppy ready to be praised. She handed it over. And everything collapsed. Sharon took the picture, looked at it, looked at Mia, looked at me, and in the sweetest, most poisonous tone imaginable, she said the line that will echo in my skull until I die. "Children from mommy's cheating don't get to call me Grandma, honey." I felt every word like a physical slap. Mia froze, like the sentence hit a kill switch inside her. Her mouth trembled, then her eyes filled. Then the first tear slid down, slow and heavy, the kind of tear a child cries when the world suddenly stops making sense. Lawrence shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Melanie looked like she wanted to smile but knew better. "Thomas. Wow." He looked like someone had shoved him underwater. His eyes were wide and stunned, his whole body rigid. He kept opening his mouth like he was going to speak, but no sound came out. And me? I was vibrating. Rage crawled up my spine in hot, electric waves. I felt it in my teeth, in my fingertips, in my pulse. But before I could speak, before I could unleash anything, Noah stood. My 8-year-old. The child they adored. The one who could do no wrong. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loud across the hardwood. Everyone flinched. He walked straight to Sharon, jaw clenched, eyes burning with something I had never seen in him before. Something fierce and heartbreakingly adult. He reached out and snatched back the picture he'd given her earlier, the sledding one, the one she'd gushed over. He grabbed it with small, shaking fingers. Then he placed the giant remote control car, the perfect, expensive, adored gift, right back at her feet. The room gasped. Even Melanie blinked like someone had unplugged her, and then Noah said, voice steady but shaking at the edges, "If my sister can't call you Grandma, then neither will I." Silence. A thick, stunned, suffocating silence. Bella stared. Melanie's mouth fell open. Sharon reeled back like she'd been struck. Noah turned to Mia and took her hand, took it gently, like she was made of something precious. Then he looked at me and said, "Mom, can we go? I don't want to be here." It was not a question. It was a verdict. And suddenly, everything in me snapped into place. "Yes," I said. "We're leaving." Thomas stood too, slowly but with purpose. There was something in his face. Shame, maybe. Or dawning clarity. Or maybe just the realization that his mother had just burned a bridge he could never rebuild. No one stopped us. No one tried. We walked to the door, the 4 of us, holding on to each other like we were crossing a battlefield. And just as I reached for the handle, I had the sharp, sickening feeling that this was only the beginning, that the real explosion hadn't even started yet. A shadow fell across Sharon's face. Melanie's hand flew to her phone. Lawrence muttered something under his breath. Then we stepped out into the cold December air, and the door closed behind us like a loaded gun cocking. If you'd told me years ago that Sharon would one day accuse me of cheating in front of my 6-year-old, I wouldn't have believed you. Not because she wasn't capable, but because I didn't think the universe would ever be quite that on the nose. But here we are, and honestly, the signs were all there. I just kept telling myself they weren't. Let's start from the beginning. I met Thomas at a game night I wasn't even supposed to attend. I'd had a terrible day. The kind where you start aggressively rethinking every life choice you've ever made. And a friend talked me into going out. "There'll be food," she said. "Maybe someone cute." There was food. The cute part was debatable. I walked in and saw him, a tall, nervous-looking guy in a NASA t-shirt, sorting game pieces by color with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. He looked up, pushed his glasses up his nose, and said, completely serious, "The probability distributions in this game heavily favor the starting player." Reader, he had me. Because underneath the awkward delivery and the statistics lecture, he was kind. He listened when I spoke. He cared about things deeply, just not in the performance-based way most people do. It was refreshing. He wasn't charming. He wasn't smooth, but he was earnest in a way that made you believe he meant every word he said. Unfortunately, he was raised by people who believed earnestness was a genetic defect. The first time he took me to meet his parents, Sharon opened the door and looked at me like I was an overdue library book she hadn't requested. "Oh," she said. "You're Emily." "Yes," I said. "And you're Sharon?" Her smile tightened. "You're shorter than I expected." "Right. Good. Off to an excellent start." Lawrence hovered behind her like a nervous pensioner waiting for permission to breathe. He shook my hand with all the confidence of a man who'd been trained to never initiate a thought. Inside, the house was a shrine to Thomas's academic excellence. Every wall had baby to PhD photos like they were documenting the evolution of an award-winning lab specimen. That dinner? One long interrogation disguised as polite conversation. "What do your parents do?" "What are you studying?" "Do you cook?" "Are you good with money?" "Thomas is very special, you know. He needs the right kind of wife." Under the table, Thomas squeezed my knee as if to say, "I know. Just endure." I endured. Barely. What I didn't know yet was that I was also auditioning to compete with his family for his wallet. I found out he was helping them financially completely by accident. One day early in our relationship, I walked past his laptop and saw a bank tab open. I wasn't snooping. My peripheral vision was simply doing its job. There it was, a recurring payment to his parents' mortgage company. "Why are you paying their mortgage?" I asked, because subtlety is not a skill I possess. He jumped. They just need a little help." "Thomas," I said, "you're a grad student. You're one lab accident away from eating cereal for dinner." "I have a scholarship," he protested, "and the lab pays, and they really appreciate it." Spoiler, they did not. Then I noticed another line, a transfer to Melanie. "Why are you paying your sister?" "She's between jobs." Melanie is always between jobs. It's her natural habitat. I didn't fight it then. I told myself it was his money, his family, his choice. I also told myself it was temporary, which was adorable in hindsight. Fast forward. Thomas finishes his master's, enters a PhD program, works 70-hour weeks for the salary of a middle school babysitter, and still sends money home like he's sponsoring 2 ungrateful contestants on a game show. Then he gets a well-paid job in applied science, and I think, finally, breathing room. Instead, the requests escalate. Bella's special programs, Melanie's new degree, their parents' home repairs, a temporary monthly contribution that somehow lasts 3 years. Every time I brought it up, Thomas looked like I was asking him to abandon a wounded puppy. "They need help," he'd say. "We're doing okay." We were doing okay because we cut corners quietly while his parents enjoyed emergency upgrades to their bathroom. Then Noah was born, and everything else blurred for a while. My in-laws adored him instantly. He looks just like Thomas, they kept saying. Our genes are strong. Our, not mine. But I was too sleep-deprived to fight about pronouns. 2 years later, Mia arrived. As she moved out of that newborn haze and her features started to take shape, I began catching flashes of someone I hadn't seen in years. My late grandmother. The same gentle eyes, the same little half-smile, the same quiet softness in her face. It hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. My grandmother had been the safest place in my childhood. Warm, steady, endlessly patient. Seeing pieces of her in Mia felt like getting a little bit of her back. When my mother-in-law first saw Mia, she frowned. She doesn't look like Noah. She looks like my grandmother, I said. Oh, she replied, like I'd told her the baby was part alien. Well, hopefully she grows into the family. Like shoes. Or debt. Then the jokes started. Are you sure she's his? We're just teasing. Relax. It's just funny Noah is Mini Thomas and Mia is... I don't know where she came from. She looks like my grandmother, I said. Again. And again. And again. They squinted at the photos, shrugged, and kept implying I'd somehow recreated my grandmother using the mailman's DNA. As Mia got older, so did the cruelty. Little comments at birthdays, whispered snipes at family dinners. She really doesn't look like our side. You might have to tell her the truth someday. The favoritism grew too. Noah got the big gifts, the praise, the special outings. Mia got the bargain bin afterthought every time. She noticed. She always noticed. Once, Noah got a cupcake with a superhero topper and twice the frosting. Mia got the sad economy version. Noah calmly transferred half his frosting to her plate and gave her the superhero. There, he said. Better. I had to pretend to look at my phone so I wouldn't cry in public. I tried telling Thomas. It's not intentional, he said. Intentional or not, my daughter was learning she was less in that house. And on Christmas, she learned exactly how less Sharon thought she was. So yes, when Sharon shoved Mia's picture back at her and said, "Children from mommy's cheating don't get to call me grandma," I wasn't shocked. But I was done. And I had no idea the detonation she triggered was only the beginning. By the time we got home from Christmas, I thought I was emotionally tapped out. Turns out, I was wrong. I tucked Noah and Mia into our bed with a movie because I couldn't bear the thought of them being more than 6 feet away from me. Then I walked down the hall, fully expecting to find Thomas pacing, spiraling, or silently imploding. Instead, I found him sitting at his desk, still in his coat, lit up by the cold glow of the monitor, clicking buttons like he was dismantling a bomb. "Thomas?" I said carefully. "What are you doing?" He didn't even look up. "Fixing something." Which is exactly the tone a man uses right before he does something irreversible. I stepped behind him. My heartbeat did this dramatic, oh no, no, no percussion solo. His bank account was open. Recurring payments, transfers, auto payments I knew nothing about. Tabs with labels like mortgage contribution and Melanie monthly. And next to each one, cancel, cancel, cancel. One click, another click, another artery cut. Wait. I grabbed the back of his chair. Are you canceling everything? Yes. That was it. One word. A guillotine of a syllable. You mean your parents' mortgage? Your sister's stuff? Bella's? All of it. He still wasn't looking at me. His jaw was locked, shoulders stiff, like he'd been carved out of cold stone. My brain was frantically flipping through every version of Thomas I had ever known. Gentle, conflict-avoidant, apologetic Thomas. and none of them matched the man sitting here deleting payment methods like they owed him money. "This is sudden," I said, which was the understatement of the decade. He exhaled, finally leaning back in his chair. Not relaxed, just done. "You know what hit me tonight?" he said, voice low. "My 8-year-old did what I should have done." He finally looked up at me. His eyes were red, furious, ashamed. "It should have been me," he said. "I should have defended her. I should have said something. I let them talk about you for years. I let them talk around Mia. But tonight, they said it to her face and I froze." His voice cracked on froze. My stomach twisted. I wanted to grab him, reassure him, something, but he wasn't done. "Noah shouldn't have been the one to stand up for her," he said. "He shouldn't have felt like he had to. That's on me, and I'm not letting it happen again." He turned back to the screen and clicked another remove card. "You have no idea," he continued, "how many times I told myself it was helping them. How many times I thought it was temporary, that they'd appreciate it, that I was doing the right thing." His laugh was short and sharp. "They never saw me as helping them. They saw me as obligated, and tonight proved that." I sat on the edge of the desk because my legs weren't prepared for this kind of emotional earthquake. "So you're done?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "Done sacrificing our kids' experiences so my mother can tell Mia she's a mistake. Done paying Melanie's bills so she can mock my daughter's existence. Done being the wallet they kick whenever they're bored." I swallowed hard. "Thomas, they're going to explode." "Let them," he said. "They've been detonating on us for years." He hit one last confirm, and the page refreshed like he'd just exorcised a demon. And then, of course, his phone buzzed. He stared at it like someone had texted him the word boo from inside his closet. "My mom," he said. "Of course," he answered and put it on speaker because apparently we were embracing transparency now. "Thomas!" she shrieked immediately. "We just got a notification that our mortgage payment method was removed. Did the bank screw something up? What is going on?" "No," he said calmly. "I removed it." Silence. Then a sound like she'd been dramatically slapped by invisible hands. "What do you mean you removed it?" she demanded. "You can't just— Your father is panicking." "You'll have to pay it yourselves," he said. "I'm not doing it anymore." "Are you kidding me? After everything we've done for you? We rely on that. We need that." I'm pretty sure my eyebrows hit the ceiling. Thomas didn't flinch. "I have my own family to support." "We are your family," she shrieked. "This is because of her, isn't it? She's turning you against us. She's poisoning—" "Stop," he said. "This isn't Emily. This is me." I could have kissed him. Right on the mouth. Right there in the middle of the room with his mom screaming on speakerphone like a malfunctioning fire alarm. "You told my daughter," he continued, "that she came from cheating. You shoved her gift back in her face. You humiliated her." "Oh, please," Sharon snapped. "She's 6. She'll forget." "Maybe," he said, voice sharp. "But Noah won't. And neither will I." Her voice went into full banshee mode. "You're being dramatic. You're destroying this family." "You already did," he said. "You just didn't expect me to notice." He hung up. Hung up. Thomas, the man who once apologized to a telemarketer for not being interested, hung up on his mother. I stared at him. He stared at the floor. His shoulders were trembling. Before I could even make a comforting noise, the phone buzzed again. Melanie. "Oh no," I muttered. "Level 2. He answered. "What the hell, Thomas?" she snapped. "Mom just called me crying. You cut her off? And me? How am I supposed to pay for Bella's classes?" "That's not my problem," he said. You can't do that, she shouted. All because Mom made a joke? She insulted my daughter, he said, and you backed her up. Oh, for crying out loud, Melanie groaned. It was funny. Everyone thinks Mia looks nothing like— Don't, he said. Don't finish that sentence. She did anyway. You don't even know if she's yours. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. That's it, he said. We're done. You're throwing away your family, she screamed. No, he said. I'm protecting mine. He hung up again, and then he leaned back, covered his face, and let out a breath that sounded like 6 years of holding everything in. I walked over and wrapped my arms around him. He didn't pull away. I'm proud of you, I whispered. He didn't speak for a moment, just breathed. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this wasn't the end. This was the fuse lighting. If there's one thing I've learned about people like Sharon, it's this. They don't lick their wounds. They sharpen their teeth. The smear campaign began less than 48 hours after Thomas cut them off. I was buttering toast for Mia when my phone buzzed with a message from a cousin I hadn't talked to in 2 years. Hey, are you okay? Your MIL posted something intense. That's never a good sentence to wake up to. I opened Facebook, and there it was, a full-length tragic monologue written by Sharon, complete with dramatic line breaks and a sepia-toned picture of her holding baby Thomas like he was a fallen soldier. According to her, she had lost her son to a manipulative woman, been cut off financially by force, been alienated from her grandson through brainwashing, and punished for speaking the truth everyone can see. Then came the stinger. We only ever expressed concern because Mia looks nothing like our family. We just wanted to protect our son. For that, we were exiled. And then, as if summoned by the devil's group chat itself, Melanie swooped into the comments like a Walmart brand hype woman. She's using him. He's blinded by love. This is what happens when you let the wrong woman take over. There were screenshots of Noah and Mia side by side with circles around their faces like they were evidence in a crime scene. My stomach turned. Emily? Thomas asked from behind me. He had that, tell me now before I punch a hole in the drywall tone. I showed him the screen. He stared for a long moment. His jaw dropped, then clenched, then did something that looked dangerously close to a spasm. They're telling people you cheated, he said. Yes, I said. Welcome to the Sharon experience, now with bonus public humiliation. He rubbed his face. People are actually agreeing with her. This is insane. Is it? I said. She's been practicing this narrative for years. This is just the first time she's had an audience. And then, as if the universe decided to spice things up, notifications started blowing up in real time. Wow, I always wondered. He should get a DNA test. Poor Thomas. She's obviously manipulating him. That little girl looks nothing like him, I'm just saying. My lungs felt too small. Thomas took the phone gently out of my hands and set it down before I threw it into the toaster. You don't deserve any of this, he said quietly. Just tell me what you want to do, and I'm with you. I took a breath. We're getting a DNA test. Let's end this circus. Mia didn't understand why someone swabbed the inside of her cheek, but Thomas explained it like it was a fun science club activity. Noah asked if he could get swabbed too. We told him maybe next time. Waiting for the results felt like holding my breath underwater, not because I doubted, never that, but because I knew what would happen when the truth hit daylight. And Sharon could not hide from daylight. While we waited, I went to my mother's house and pulled out the old photo boxes. My grandmother's face stared back at me from every angle, smiling, serious, laughing with the same soft eye crinkle Mia has when she's genuinely happy. The resemblance wasn't just uncanny. It felt like someone had stitched a piece of her into my daughter. And it was something Sharon would have known if she hadn't spent the last decade pretending my family didn't exist. When the DNA email came, I opened it sitting next to Thomas on the couch, my leg bouncing like a nervous rabbit. Probability of paternity, 99.9999%. I exhaled. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath for that long. Congrats, I said dryly. You are, in fact, the father of the child you've been raising for 6 years. He snorted. Send it to me. We didn't respond to Sharon. We didn't comment on her post. We didn't tag or confront or message or argue. We simply made our own post. A collage, Mia smiling, Thomas holding baby Mia, a picture of my grandmother, a picture of Mia next to my grandmother, and our caption, for anyone who's heard the rumors, here are the facts. Mia is Thomas's biological child. DNA attached. She also looks exactly like Emily's grandmother, which is something you'd know if you'd ever bothered to learn her family instead of questioning her fidelity for years. Someone told our 6-year-old that she came from mommy's cheating and that she doesn't get to call her grandma. This was said directly to her face. That is why we cut contact. That is why financial support ended. You do not speak to a child that way and still get access to them. Thomas reposted the same thing with one extra paragraph. Since grad school, I've sent my parents and sister roughly $500 to $900 a month, whatever they asked for, whatever they said they couldn't cover. When I finally totaled all of it, it was $80,940. I have every transfer. And after all that, they accused my wife of cheating and told my daughter she isn't mine. We're done here. We hit post. Then we waited. For about 7 minutes, nothing happened. Then everything happened. The comments rolled in. I had no idea she said that to Mia. That's disgusting. Oh, wow. The resemblance to your grandmother is undeniable. I'm so sorry. No child deserves that. Honestly, good for you for cutting them off. And in the group chats? Silence. Then confusion. Then the quiet, satisfying crumble of people realizing they'd backed the wrong side. One cousin messaged me privately. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I thought Sharon was exaggerating. This is awful. Another. She really said that to a 6-year-old? Not okay. Even better? Sharon had a big birthday coming up. One she'd been planning for months. Invitations had gone out to half the extended family, and one by one, everyone canceled. Sorry, can't make it. Not attending after what I heard. I'm uncomfortable supporting someone who talks to children that way. She ended up with an overpriced cake, an empty room, and Lawrence trying to pretend he liked being alone with her. I won't lie. I savored that image. But the real twist came later that week, in the form of a phone call from an unfamiliar number. Is this Emily? A voice asked. Older, sharper, polished. Yes? This is Virginia, she said. Thomas's aunt. I froze. We'd met twice. She was Sharon's older sister, 10 years wiser and 90 degrees less unhinged. I saw the posts, she said. I also got the unfiltered version from someone who actually has a spine. I didn't dare laugh, but I wanted to. I just have one question, she continued. Did Sharon really say that to your daughter? Yes, I said, right to her face. And the $80,000? Accurate. I heard a long exhale. Well, she said, her voice turning crisp. Then I've made a decision. My heart did a weird little kick. What kind of decision? The kind that involves lawyers, she said. And wills. I gripped the counter. I've removed my sister, she continued. Every cent she was expecting is now going to Thomas and the children. I've also established a trust fund that begins paying out immediately. I'd rather see my money help a family with integrity than reward cruelty. I didn't speak. I couldn't. And before you worry, she added, this is not charity. This is justice. Your children deserve better than to grow up under the shadow of Sharon's bitterness." When I hung up, I stood there for a long moment, stunned, my heart pounding in my throat. Thomas walked in. "Who was that?" "Your aunt," I said. "You're going to want to sit down." Because suddenly, for the first time in years, the balance of power shifted. Not because we fought harder, not because we screamed louder, but because someone finally saw the truth and decided enough was enough. And the best part? Sharon couldn't blame me for this one. She did it to herself. 6 months later, and the silence is still blissful. My in-laws? Not so blissful. Once Thomas cut the financial cord, they spiraled fast. They had to sell their house, downsize, and, according to one cousin, finally admit that maybe relying on a future inheritance wasn't a retirement plan. Especially since that inheritance went to us. Thomas's aunt, the one with the late millionaire husband, she rewrote her will the same week the drama blew up. Turns out the substantial money Sharon counted on her entire life now sits in a trust for our kids. And a very generous chunk for us, too. Meanwhile, we've started traveling, living easily for the first time ever. So what do you think? Too far or not far enough? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.